Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we are taking it back to chapters 32, 32X, and endgame of Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade. We fucking did it, guys. We're fucking out of here. We're done. We're finished. I never have to play this dog shit ass game ever again. Holy shit. Oh. Okay, all right. You take a step back. Overall, and I'm going to talk about this in the wrap-up, so I won't get too into it here. A lot of the chapters that I was expecting to be bad weren't as bad as I was expecting. Cog of Destiny was manageable, Battle Before Dawn was manageable, Night of Farewells was manageable. And for a while, I was like, none of these chapters are great, none of these chapters are particularly good, but maybe I was a little bit too harsh on the late game of FE7. Maybe if you go in with the right strategy, you have the foreknowledge, you have the WAD page pulled up, and you're smart about it, maybe it's not so bad. Well, then I played Victory or Death, and then I played The Value of Life, I think was what the last one's called, and I wanted to kill myself. Not just a little bit. I wanted to genuinely actually kill... Okay, well, obviously I'm exaggerating. But I was very tempted to just stop. I had a schedule, too. I had a schedule planned out. I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna play these chapters before I go home. I'm gonna play these chapters a few days before I go home and I'm away from my computer a little bit for Christmas vacation. And then I will record the episodes and edit them, possibly edit and uploaded them before Christmas, But that didn't end up happening because it took me so long to beat fucking Victory or Death and the other fucking one whose name I can't remember that I didn't end up being able to record the episode until today is the 29th. So I probably won't even have this episode out until the 30th or the 31st. If I'm lucky, I'll have it out before the new year, but we'll see. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to. I think the last couple of episodes are gonna have to wait a little bit, the wrap up and the last couple of SSS episodes. But it is what it is. So we're done though. We're finished. FE7 is a thing of the past. We're gonna do the I already kind of laid it out, but we're gonna be doing the wrap-up episode, and we're going to be doing 2 SSS episodes, not in that order. I think it's going to be SSS wrap-up and then another SSS episode for the Lords. So look forward to that. I don't know why I'm sounding like I'm wrapping up the episode when I'm just starting it. I think my brain's a little bit all over the place. It's a little bit late. I'm a little bit tired. I have a new microphone. I don't know. I mentioned this in the last SSS episode, which is going to go up before this one most likely. So you've already heard it. Hopefully it's not too bad. I'll consider switching back to the other one if I don't like how this one sounds. But we'll play it by ear. Literally. Okay, I'm putting off having to talk about this bullshit. Let's go ahead and get started with our chapters for the episode, starting with chapter 32, Victory or Death. So the opening narration talks a little bit about how the final battle is approaching. They enlist the help of Fargus to get them back to the Dread Isle like they did the first time. They arrive at the Dread Isle, and then they say, Fargus, you're super strong. We've seen your stats. We've seen that you're like the most powerful enemy in this game, more powerful than most bosses that we fought up to this point. What we want you to do is we want you to wait here, and if we die, deliver a message for us. Like, let people know what happened to us. Now, I know in-universe, maybe this isn't as silly as it sounds, right? Obviously, they need someone to go back, and they need to make sure that someone finds out what happened to them, even if it's a long shot that they'll actually believe Fargus. But on the other hand, their odds of survival drastically go up if they bring Fargus along because he's so strong. I actually think Fargus joining here would have been really cool. I think he would have made it for a great Gateau archetype, because this game does have a Gateau archetype, but there's nothing stopping it from having two, right? I mean, some games have zero, and then plenty of games have like two Jagans, for example. So why not do Gotos? I think it would have been awesome. Fargus is such a cool character, and I think it's a shame that he's not playable, or even just like an NPC. That would have been kind of neat. If Dart is alive, as everyone's leaving, Fargus pulls Dart to the side and they have a nice little conversation about how he's got to come back alive or whatever. It's nice and it's good. It's nice attention to detail because it would be kind of weird if he didn't have a conversation with Dart. I mean, no, it really wouldn't, right? Because like that's one of those things that you would easily write off as like they didn't bother to include because he can die, right? Like I don't think I would have thought twice about it if there wasn't a conversation between him and Dart here, but it's a nice addition that I'm glad they included. Meanwhile, you have stuff like Corel not being able to talk to Carla in battle preparations, even though that would make way more sense as a way to recruit her than fucking Bartray needing to be fucking level 5 and promoted and survive a round of combat with her in the arena. It's just so weird. I don't know why they decided to do it that way, but whatever. As they're getting ready to leave, the lords talk to Nils and are like, hey Nils, you have to stay here, it's gonna be dangerous to you, whatever. And then after everybody left, there's a moment where Fargus is like, oh man, I forgot. I wanted to give them something, but I forgot to. If only someone could go after them, or I'll send somebody after them, or something like that. And Nils volunteers to do it. This is a nice moment if we assume that he is intentionally trying to give Nils the encouragement to go after them, which he clearly wants to do, but seems to be like kind of on the fence about it. If we assume, I think that's fair to make that assumption. I don't hate this game's story that much that I would assume that a pretty obvious, it seems pretty obviously the intention here, but it's not a great script, so what is what it is. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. This object that Fargus forgot to give to Ellawood & Co. turns out to be an Earth Seal, by the way, which is so fucking ridiculous. I don't know why they would give you an Earth Seal at this point. You'd think it makes sense to be like a stat booster or something, but like or maybe one of the rare promotion items, like a well, it wouldn't really make sense for it to be an Ocean Seal, but they could do like a Fel contract or something. I don't know. But why an Earth Seal? Am I really going to be using an unpromoted character at this stage of the game? I don't know. Maybe in the earlier, maybe if you really want to use a team of like all Cavaliers and all mages, then maybe you're out of promotion items for one of them. That's the best I got. I don't have any better explanation for that. There's a scene with Nurgle here. I wrote something down in here about corrupting Limstella. I don't remember what that means. So let me take a look at the script. Oh yeah, so okay, so here's what it is. Nurgle gave Limstella like a power buff, basically. But he says that his that her body will not be able to handle its power. So before tomorrow, her body will be all like corrupted and destroyed or whatever. And he doesn't seem to care much. The reason that I even decided to bring this up is because this chapter tries to characterize Limstella a little bit, despite Limstella being a pretty like nothing character up to this point. Limstella has always been sort of the perfect morph in a lot of ways, right? Like she doesn't have emotions to cloud her judgment or get in the way, like with Ephidel or like with Sonya, especially with Sonya. I think Ephidel is kind of more of an afterthought at this point, but Limstella has always been very robotic, very calculating, never really given any sort of personality of her own. And from that perspective, Limstella is sort of Nurgle's, at least Nurgle would consider her or them, I guess, to be his perfect creation. But they try to do a little bit here with Limstella at the end. I'll just kind of jump ahead a little bit. Limstella is the boss of this chapter, and their death quote implies that they're starting to feel emotion, which I think is so cool. So one of my favorite like narrative devices, I guess you could call it. One of my favorite ideas or subjects to tackle in stories is what it means to be human, and what it means to like the exploration of like, can artificial beings have, like, what's the line between artificial beings and real people? If they have human memories and human emotions and human intelligence, where does that line get drawn? And where, what separates people from that, or what doesn't? I guess more in most cases, most interestingly, what doesn't separate people from artificial beings that think and operate the same way that we do? You see this in a lot of stories. And I think it's cool. I think it's awesome, like, basically every fucking time, even when they don't do as much with it, because it's something you can really read between the lines with. And I like doing that here too. Like, I think it's really interesting to think about how the morphs. I mean, we talked about this with Nurgle in Genesis, right? Terrible, terrible map, but I really liked what they did there with the story with Kishuna, and this idea of, like, Nurgle wanting to create life, and what that really means. Like, what are the implications of that? Sonya clearly had emotions. Why does the fact that she was a morph make her any different than the rest of us, right? I mean, she was evil, but, like, humans can be evil. There are plenty of evil humans in this game alone, right? Like Lundgren is a great example, or Nurgle for that matter. Although Nurgle has a little bit of an extenuating circumstance, maybe. Darin, or Darren, or Ephidel for that matter, right? Like Ephidel could have just been, if you told me that he was a human instead of a morph, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So what is the difference? And Limstella is seemingly, kind of a contradiction to that. But then right at the end of their life, they start to exhibit some emotion, and you could argue, like, oh, was that emotion always there? Were they just trying to cover it up, or does it start to come out? Maybe the longer a morph is alive, or maybe, like, depending on what they're exposed to throughout their lives, they can start to develop emotions. Who knows? And this is a subject that I wish the game expanded more on. I think it could have been really interesting. But obviously that wasn't the main thought, like the main theme that this game wanted to tackle, which, like, I what is the main theme that this game wanted to tackle? Like, what is I think that's maybe something I should say for the wrap up episode, but I want to spend some time thinking about that between now and then, because there's it doesn't feel like, at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like too much changed or has, like, been accomplished, like, thematically or narratively, other than just, like, the pure literal events of what's happening on screen. So I don't know. I lost the plot a little bit there, but the point is, I kind of like what they do with Limstella. I wish that they expanded upon it more, but I am very much in I'm able to on this particular subject, I'm able to extrapolate a lot and have a lot of fun thinking and talking about stuff like this, even if the game doesn't seem interested in, like, fleshing it out very much at all. Okay, and that's basically where the chapter begins. Nils shows up. Nils is now playable for the remaining chapters. I believe, I didn't test it out, obviously, but I believe there's a glitch where if Nils dies in this chapter or in chapter 32X, then he, there's like the game soft locks basically in endgame, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I'm not sure if that's actually true or not, or maybe it's just, like, it depends on maybe it's a translation patch thing. I'm not really sure. But just be careful with Nils, because if he dies and you decide to leave him dead, that might cause issues for you. I'm not 100% sure. Someone who's more familiar with that glitch should let me know. So, as I've alluded to a couple of times, there is a guidance chapter tied to Victory or Death, chapter 32. Chapter 32X, and in order to get this guidance chapter, I believe the only requirement is that you need to beat Victory or Death in under 20 turns or fewer, which is not, like, super difficult, but especially on Hector hard mode, it can be a little challenging because there's so many enemies that attack you. It's frankly fucking ridiculous how many enemies attack you in this map. There's, oh yeah, I guess I forgot to mention this. I didn't forget to mention this. This hasn't really been relevant until now. This chapter has, I believe, by a wide margin, the highest number of enemies in the entire game. On Hector hard mode, There are 39 enemies to start off with, which isn't a ton. In fact, other chapters might have had more. But where it gets ridiculous is with the reinforcements. There are potentially 268 potential reinforcements that can spawn on this map. Once again, tied to reinforcement zones, although I think this time there are also reinforcements that spawn like within set numbers of turns. So you have to worry about it from that perspective as well. I banged my head against this chapter for a while. It was giving me a really hard time. Until I decided that I was just gonna, kind of like what I did in Cog of Destiny, I just had everybody go to like in one direction and avoid most of the reinforcement zones. This did mean that I missed out on one of the villages, which I will talk about. The villages in this chapter are kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. I guess I'll talk about that now. So the only village that I needed to visit was the northern one. The northern village has a recruitable character who we'll talk about in a moment. All of the villages are under... I say villages. They're like ruins. But the bandits... There are bandits around who will attack and attempt to destroy them. So you have to be somewhat careful of that. You can't be too lax. Otherwise, there'll be you'll miss out on your chance to get the items and recruitable character in these villages. The middle village, which is on like a sort of across a river, it's a little bit difficult to get to without a flyer, but if you have a flyer, it's no issue. That one has a new bracelet for I guess now just Nils. I believe that one sets Litany, which increases crit avoid, I believe. Let me double check that. Sets Litany. Temporary boost to the avoidance. Okay, so yeah, so I got a little bit confused there because it says plus 15 or plus 10 dodge. A dance that increases allies' dodge for a turn. Now, under normal circumstances, that would very obviously mean avoid, right? Like, what else would it mean? Well, the answer is that sometimes dodge is used to refer to crit avoid. So I thought that might have been the case here, but no, it's just avoidance, which is like, that's fine. Nina's Grace 9 times out of 10 is going to be significantly more useful than Set's Litany, because it doesn't just... maybe if Set's Litany of boosted avoid by like 30, then it'd be a different story. But Nina's Grace makes it substantially... makes tanking substantially easier, and is much more effective for increasing the durability of your units than Set's Litany would ever be. I might have mentioned it a little bit. There is one other ring that was obtainable in chapter, I believe, 28X. I know what chapter is it. It's Night of Farewells. I just don't remember if that's the number. It's in one of the chests there. That one is called Thor's Ire, and it boosts crit. I haven't given a lot of attention to the way the Dancer class works in this game, but I have to say I actually think that it's really cool. I like the idea of the Dancers having things to do other than just dance. I mean, obviously in some of the other games, the Dancers can fight. Lara can fight. Sylvia can fight, and Lean can fight from Genealogy. Fina can fight. Then there's like a stretch in the middle where they can't fight at all for some reason. I don't know why they decided to change that. But then starting in Awakening again, they can start fighting again. So like Olivia, Azura, I mean, I guess there's not a Dancer in FE15. If you want to count Faye, then maybe. And then obviously Dancers can fight in 3 houses, and then I Engage as well, I think. Yeah, I can fight. Seedall can fight and Engage. So clearly there is some interest in having Dancers be able to fight. The problem is that 9 times out of 10, I would more like 99 times out of 100, the most useful thing that your Dancer can do in a turn in games where they can also fight is dance anyway. You know, why would you rather attack with Olivia, who's probably not going to do that much damage unless you've poured a lot of levels into her, or would you rather dance so that Robin can attack a second time? You know what I mean? Or I guess a 4th time if you have Gale Force. So from that perspective, I don't think that giving thieves the ability to fight is the answer to this problem. It's not even really a problem. Like in the games where they can't fight, it's still fine. Dancers are still fun to use. They can still be really useful. They are still really useful. But I think that this is the only time that they've ever, I guess there's some games where there are like different types of dances, I think. Radiant Dawn has like the different Galders that do different things. That's similar, but none of those are very useful. Whereas Phila's Might and Ninna's Grace, I found myself using a lot. Set's Litany, definitely not as much, and Thor's Ire I didn't even get, so definitely not Thor's Ire. But Ninna's Grace and Phila's Might are both extremely useful, and I found myself using them a lot of the times where I didn't have an ally that I needed to dance, but I did have an ally that I wanted to survive a little bit more consistently, or I needed to do a little bit more damage with. So I think that this is a really cool concept that I'm genuinely really both surprised and disappointed that it hasn't come back in a later game. I would have very much liked to see it return, but it didn't. So oh well, c'est la vie. The final village down on the south right is it just gives you a talisman, but that's not the interesting part of this village. What's interesting about this village is that the person who you meet there is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It is Sophia from FE6. Just the character Sophia from FE6 is here on the Dread Isle, near the Dragon's Gate instead of near Arcadia. The explanation for why she's there, I mean, there isn't one, but basically she's looking for Athos. But she, obviously Athos hasn't joined you yet, so you can't have Athos visit this village. So instead, whoever she talks with, there's like a lot of different variations on this conversation. But it's usually some variation of, where's Athos? Oh, he's not with us right now. Okay, well then say hi to him for me, basically. Or I've been looking for him, but I can't find him. Anyway, you should take this. And then she just leaves, I guess, and goes back to Arcadia. I don't get it. Why is she here? The answer is that they just wanted to have an FE6 cameo, which is fine. But then why didn't they have her, they could have had her cameo in the chapter where you're in Nabata, like they had with Faye. I don't get what the thought process there was on that one. But it's pretty interesting. There's a whole bunch of different conversations. They're not interesting, or complexly written. They're just kind of different variations of that conversation that I just laid out for you guys. So I wouldn't say it's particularly interesting, but it's a little interesting. I'll say that much. Okay, so let's talk about the recruitable character in this chapter. If you go to the northern village and you visit with anybody, it can be anyone that visits this village, you will recruit Renault, who is a bishop. He's pretty solid. He unfortunately has kind of mediocre stats. I wouldn't even say that. He has decent speed. He has 20 speed, which is the same as Corel. Not that much earlier in the game, I don't think. 5-ish chapters earlier in the game. More like 6 or 7 if you're counting Gaiden chapters. So he's pretty fast, is my point. Not many characters are going to be this fast, especially magic characters or healers. And then he comes with a light and a staves, so he can use warp out of the gate. He comes with a fortify staff that he can use, but he can use basically any staves that you want him to use. The unfortunate thing about Renault is that he has very low magic, which is ludonarrative, because Renault, as we learned from some of his supports, which we're going to get to in the last SSS episode, basically, is that he was not always a bishop. He started life as a mercenary, which is why he's weirdly bulky. He has decent defense and constitution and HP stats for a mercenary, or for a bishop, because he used to be a mercenary. He's fine, at this point in the game. I certainly used him a fair bit in this chapter. He can be kind of helpful. He can be, he can kill a lot of enemies. He can be a good staff pot. But as long as you have decent options for endgame, he's not really worth bringing, in my opinion. But if you're running low on good options, maybe a few of your guys have died, or maybe you just didn't train a good bishop for whatever reason, he's fine. You can absolutely make him work. Okay. I feel like I'm kind of blowing through this chapter. The only reason it feels that way is because it took me so long to get through this chapter. Like you guys have no idea. Like Victory or Death, sorry, Cog of Destiny took me like maybe 3 or 4 tries. Battle Before Dawn took me like three. No, Battle Before Dawn took me, I think, there might have been like a couple of times where I had to reset like super early, but for the most, I think like solid attempts, it only took me two. Fucking Night of Farewell has only took me two. You know, like some of the most notorious chapters in this game only took me a couple of attempts each. But this chapter, for whatever reason, despite the fact that I don't think this one is well known as being like particularly difficult and just kind of annoying, this one took me at least 10, maybe 15 tries to get through it. Like, I was getting my ass beat by this chapter, and I don't know if I was just getting bad luck. I was getting bad luck at a lot of times. Like, I kept getting hit by very low percentage hits, which fucked me up a couple times. Once I decided to send everybody the same direction, I think I won first try. I did lose Jafar. Jafar died, so rip Jafar. But he died for a noble cause. Me not having to reset the goddamn map again, because I was right at the end too when he died. So it would have set me back like a fucking 20 minutes. I really didn't want to do that. So Jafar did die. Getting to Limstella. So this is a Seas map. You have to get to Limstella. You have to kill her, and neither of those goals are particularly easy. Because one, there's a shitload of enemies. Most of them aren't strong, but there's like a couple promoted enemies mixed in. There's some bishops, or not bishops. There might be some bishops, but there's some druids. There's some wyvern lords. The wyvern lords are particularly scary. Those are the ones that killed Jafar. They're pretty tough. And then Limstella herself is extremely strong. She has like crazy base stats. She has I think capped defense and res, pretty good speed. She comes with a bolting tome, so she can bolting your ass from a mile away. But I was able to brute force through to Limstella and kill her, and I did warp a little bit. I think like Hector was like most of the way there, but I was starting to get overrun, so I did warp him like the last, I think like maybe 10 tiles, 12 tiles, something like that. So I guess if you want to call that warp skipping, then you can say I broke my warp skipping rule. But I think it's fair to say that I made a concerted effort to get him to most of the way to Limstella anyway. So I don't think that really counts. Yeah, and that's the end of the chapter. There's a secret shop here. And I feel like a little bit of a dummy. Let me double check what exactly the secret shop had in it. Hold on. Yeah, okay, so there's Earth Seal, a Fell Contract, Ocean Seal, Physic, Unlock, and Barrier. Most of these aren't going to be very useful to you. Barrier and Physic are both pretty cool. Unlock also can have a niche use in endgame, depending on how you want to go about, and not even in endgame. In the guidance chapter, Unlock can be kind of useful as well. Although you already have an Unlock staff, and I find it very difficult to believe that anybody would have burned the Unlock staff uses by now, but maybe because it only works on doors, not chests. If it worked on chests, then that would maybe be a different story, but it only works on doors. There's a couple instances where Unlock can be useful in the final chapter, or the final 2 chapters, and Barrier and Physic as well. I did buy a Fell Contract, and I feel like a little bit of a dummy, because I didn't want to promote Legalt. I did, and it didn't end up mattering. I didn't use Legalt basically at all. So I sold my Fell Contract. I got a shitload of gold. But Jafar died, and I had a fuckload of money. I was thinking about doing this already before Jafar died, but I think Jafar dying kind of like set it in stone because I had already brought the member card. I think maybe Merlinus had it. I don't remember. Either way, I went and bought a Fell Contract and used it to promote Legalt from a thief to an assassin, which does cost him the ability to steal. However, he can still pick locks, and he gets like a fair bit better in combat. He unlocks the silencer skill. I think he might get a crit boost, or maybe that's just because he hit S swords. I don't really know. But either way, it was a decent promotion for him. He wasn't very good still, and I didn't end up using him. I used him a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's how the chapter ends. Like I said, there's a conversation, or like Limstella's death quote that's the word I'm looking for, where she says something like, I guess I could just find it and read it out. Victor, death script, Hector, defeating Limstella. Yeah, there we go. She says, I am not human. This body and heart are constructs. Yes, as is this sorrow. So that's the only thing we get from Limstella that implies any sort of humanization or characterization. But it's neat still. I kind of like it. After the chapter ends, after you seize with Hector, basically the wrap up to this chapter narratively is that we get some backstory for Ninian and Nils. We basically already know most of what we need to know about them. We know that they're dragons. We know that they came from the other side of the Dragon's Gate. But that's basically it. That's all that we know. And basically Nils tells the story of how Ninian and him ended up coming to this side. So they fled through the Dragon's Gate during the Scouring. I think that's what's said here. I don't actually super remember. I want to make something clear, because I guess I don't know if I just forgot or if it just never really clicked in my head, but I mentioned in a previous episode that, like, maybe, I thought I was being clever with this shit. I said maybe Ninian and Nils crossed over during the Scouring, and they were born before Nurgle found Arcadia, and in my head, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That explains a lot. And then reflecting back on it, I was like, wait, that's so fucking obvious. Why did I never realize that until now? Why did it take me like 6 different playthroughs of this game to understand that was what happened? I'd like to blame the rating, but I think it is probably more likely that I'm just a fucking idiot, which is fine. I have no issue accepting that I'm a dumbass. I've been knowing this my whole life. Anyway, the gist is that they went through the Dragon's Gate. There's a lot of theories about what the Dragon's Gate actually is, and not so much what it is, but where it leads to. This is kind of fueled by Awakening, because in Awakening, I believe there's a place that's called the Dragon's Gate in Awakening that is where you access the DLC, which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek reference, but and you could maybe use it as evidence for some theorizing. I don't think that it's much to go on. I think they just kind of wanted a fun way to contextualize the DLC in the narrative, like, oh, these are like alternate dimensions that you're going to, where things happen differently, and that's fine. I think we can look at that from that perspective. I don't think it really adds. I don't think it like is any concrete evidence in the theories. However, when you look past that, we don't really have any evidence of any sort of like any evidence to go on whatsoever for where the Dragon's Gate actually leads to. All we know is that there were humans there. So, but they got along much better with dragons. Considering where this game takes place in the overarching series narrative, or I guess there's no overarching series narrative, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, considering that this game is so let me put it to you this way. This game is the second game that takes place in Elebe, right? Along with FE6. Now, where do all of the other games in the series up to this point take place? Where do FE 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 take place? We know for 100% fact, based on evidence in, I think, like evidence confirmed in like manuals or something like that, some supplemental material, that FE4 and 5 take place in the same world as 1, 2, and 3, just thousands of years, I believe, in the past. So I think logically, considering that the only other continent or the only other like world that we know of in this series at this point in the series is the one where Yggdrasil and Arcania and Valentia all are. I think it makes sense to assume that they ended up there, and that is sort of the prevailing consensus, I think. But there's not much evidence for it outside of, yeah, probably based on what we know up to this point. There is I don't know any of the evidence used to support it, if there is any, or if it's just kind of like a crackhead tinfoil hat theory. But there is a theory that I've heard multiple times that Nils is actually Forseti from Yggdrasil. I don't know how realistic that is. But it's certainly I mean, we don't know enough about it to say for sure that it isn't true, so sky's the limit, I guess. And then Ninian and Nils, they were just chilling. They were praying in the temple, I guess, whatever temple that they came from. And they heard someone's voice calling to them from the other side of the Dragon's Gate. Nils describes it as sounding like an old friend, which makes sense somewhat because we know, from previous chapters, that Nurgle is their father. So I don't know if Nils just wasn't sure where the voice came from, if he knew it sounded familiar but not really who it belonged to, or maybe he's trying to say, maybe he knows oh, hey, that's my father's voice, but he just doesn't want to tell the others that. Maybe he's still hiding that. I'm not 100% sure. Either way, they go to the other side of the Dragon's Gate and realize that the voice belonged to Nurgle the whole time, and was captured by him. But they managed to escape a couple times actually, and that's how the things happen in the events of the main game. So not anything super out of the realm of what we already knew. However, it is nice to have some of those gaps filled in, I guess. Okay, and that's the end of Chapter 32. I think we can go ahead and move on to Chapter 32X, which is called The Value of Life. This one is the third and final chapter that focuses on the magic seal Kishuna. And we get a cutscene at the beginning of this chapter that explains sort of how Kishuna ended up where he was now, or where he is now. So essentially, if you remember, Kishuna was created by Nurgle specifically because Nurgle created he created a nerf. A nerf? What? He created a morph that had emotions. And it seemed like at the time, based on the cutscene that we saw from Kishuna's perspective back in Genesis, it seemed like Nurgle was just doing that kind of to do it. He was very academic about the whole thing. He didn't seem interested in what Kishuna could do for him. More just hey, I've created you. What does that make us? What is this relationship like? Am I myself unto a god now that I have created life? And we can assume at that point, considering he's obviously messing around with quintessence, we can assume that he probably was already pretty far gone at that point. But at the very least, it seems like he was able to entertain the possibility, or at least the thought that, hey, maybe this is, he was able to approach the situation from the perspective of something other than what can this person do for me. However, we see that eventually, I don't know how early on into this relationship it was, but Nurgle has decided that he does not care about Kishuna anymore, because he says to Kishuna, "You're useless. You can't fight. You can't collect quintessence for me. I have no use for you," and basically disowns him and kicks him out. And so we understand now that Kishuna has basically been living his life. I don't know where all the other morphs came from, but he's been living his life sort of not feeling welcome to the only person who, the person who created him, essentially, his father figure, kind of. I mean, that's reading into a lot into a character that doesn't actually have any dialogue. But we can safely assume that Kishuna is an outcast and that he hasn't been able to live in peace, especially considering that everybody seems to despise him everywhere else he goes. It's unknown whether he was created with the intention of being a magic seal, or if that was some sort of malfunction. He wasn't supposed to work that way. It's not immediately obvious to me, at least. But Kishuna is obviously very old, very frail. I say frail, honestly, a little bit bulky. But he looks frail. He looks like an old man. So we can assume that maybe he just wasn't physically capable of fighting. Maybe the magic seal effect is on purpose. Who knows? I certainly don't. There's a little bit here where Hector has to explain what a magic seal is to Lynn and Elliewood, which is just weird to me because Pent and Hawkeye explained the concept to Hector back in fucking Genesis, and we're left to assume that Hector just didn't tell either of the other two about that, nor did Hawkeye or Pent apparently. So I'm not really sure why that is. When he could have easily would have made sense. Did no one just be like, "Hey, Hector, do you know what that was about? Did you find out any information about the situation that we were just in?" I don't know why he wouldn't just fill them in then, but he didn't apparently, which I thought it was kind of funny. Okay, so I have to talk about this chapter now, and honestly, it's not that bad. It's a little annoying, but part of that annoyance was brought on by my own stupidity. And what I mean by that is, so you look at this chapter, right, and you look at how it's laid out, and it's all basically all berserkers. Not basically, it is literally all berserkers, except for Kashuna. It is all berserkers. And some of those berserkers have hammers. They have like sword reavers, which is what you got to watch out for. They have hand axes and tomahawks. They have devil axes, which can be kind of tricky. But they're all berserkers, and berserkers aren't like, especially if you're using sword units, they aren't super dangerous. So I thought, okay, what would be fun is if I took some of my less powerful characters for a spin here. Just one last go at it to try to give them a little bit of a shot to be useful. So I brought Legault here, freshly promoted into an assassin. I brought Carla, and I believe I brought like Oswin, and then maybe one other person. Unfortunately, this didn't work out for me. I got kind of close a couple of times, but I didn't actually manage to win because Carla just genuinely sucks that bad. She gets one shot by the guys with devil axes if they ever manage to connect. It's not very likely, but it is possible. You have to be worried about the sword reavers. If you bring everybody who can use swords, I've tried to mitigate that by bringing Oswin so that he could use lances to fight the sword reaver guys. The issue with that is he would get dogpiled and ended up taking a lot of damage. The real issue with this chapter, and it would be like hysterically easy if this wasn't the case, but the real issue with this chapter is that it's very difficult to find opportunities to heal in this chapter. I didn't even bother bringing a healer because for 90% of the map is covered by Kashuna's magic seal effect, which prevents healing. So I had to distribute. I only had a few elixirs left at this point. For some reason, I didn't buy as many as I probably should have during battle preparations. But I only had a handful of elixirs at this point, so I had to distribute them out pretty strategically. So eventually what I ended up doing was I abandoned this idea. I dropped Carla. I dropped Legault. I might have kept Oswin around. I don't actually remember. But I took a strong group of like actual units. I brought Florina. I brought Hawkeye. And I brought somebody else who I don't remember. It might have actually been Oswin still. And even then, it took me a few tries because, again, I was just getting worn down by how strong some of these berserkers are, right? Like some of them have devil axes that can do a lot of damage. They can crit sometimes, although I think I actually got very lucky in the crit department. I didn't get crit very often. I think I maybe like once or twice, and it didn't end up mattering, I don't think. They're sword reavers, so you can't just rely on... Oh, Harkin was the last one that I brought. You can't just rely on tanking with sword units all day, right? That just doesn't work. So... it took me a little bit, and then you actually, once you get into the throne room, you unlock the door to the throne room where Kashuna is, and they fucking berserkers start piling out of the stairs in the room. So that can be difficult to deal with. You have to block them, I guess, or like figure out some way to like just kill them quickly, because they can do a lot of damage. There's just so many of the fuckers. There are so many reinforcements in this chapter, and your fucking what I ended up doing, and this was easier said than done because he's pretty bulky, pretty dodgy, especially on a throne. You can only attack him from one spot, but I ended up killing Kashuna. This is another instance where, honestly, this entire chapter, Nina's Grace and Phila's Might were putting in a lot of work. Phila's Might here, in particular, let me do a lot of damage with brave weapons on Kashuna, which let me take him out relatively quickly. Oh, there was okay. So let me explain this weird glitch that happened. And I actually thought this was gonna soft lock me at one point. It didn't, but I'll explain the glitch. So I was fighting a berserker with Hector, and the berserker's devil axe backfired and did damage to the guy. It didn't kill him, but it did do damage to him. Then Hector attacked, and Hector did damage to the guy, killed the guy, but Hector's HP started going up. Like his HP value just started going up and 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 up. I ended up holding down speed up for a while to see if it just like if it would just keep going or if it would eventually like stop. It did eventually stop. And the game was able to continue on as normal, and it didn't happen to me again. So I don't really know what that's about. Is that if that's a glitch that people know about? Let me know, because I'm curious what the hell happened there. But not super concerned about it. I really was, because it was close to the end of the map, so I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to restart over this. But no, it ended up working out okay. At the end of this chapter, you finally kill Kishuna. The past couple of times he's merely fled, and you've had to just like deal with him as he pops up again and again. But this time he is eventually dead for real. And apparently we don't actually see like a death quote here or whatever. But apparently as he's dying, he shouts out Nurgle's name, which is just kind of like, it's very sad. I feel very bad for Kishuna. I hope that whatever afterlife there is for Morphs, if he's able to go to an afterlife, I hope that it's a-okay for him, or at least better than what he had to deal with while he was alive. Honestly, if there is an afterlife in the FE7 universe, I mean, we know there is because they're like ghosts and shit. There's like fucking Sigurd and Deirdre come back from heaven or whatever. But if there is one, then the Morphs probably don't get to go there because they're referred to multiple times as being like abominations and like fucking distortions of nature and shit like that. So, yeah, Kishuna's probably not doing too hot. Okay, that is everything, I think, before the final chapter. So let's go ahead and start talking about Endgame, aka Chapter 33 of Hector Mode, which is called Light. It's time for the final battle. And who's here but Athos? Athos has returned, and he has decided to start distributing out the legendary weapons that he took from you. Because at the end of the chapter where you get the legendary weapons, Ninian dies, he decides that he's going to hang on to the legendary weapons in the meantime. So he gives Durandal to Eliwood, he gives Armads to Hector, and he pulls out of his ass something called the Soul Cadi, which he describes as being the sibling blade, I think is the word that he chooses to use, to Lynn's Mani Cadi. And the Soul Cadi is just completely fucking worthless. It's so bad. It has absolutely no redeeming quality. It's very weak. It's extremely heavy. And it's just not good. It does effective damage on wyverns, which is helpful exactly once. In this chapter, it is against the final boss, and Mylin was too weak to even consider going up against the final boss anyway, so it didn't matter. The Soul Cadi is like notoriously terrible. If you've ever played this game, I assume you know how bad the Soul Cadi is. You don't need me to explain it to you. Merlinus is not allowed to come for this final chapter. There's a nice little heartwarming scene here where they tell him to go back to Lycia, and set up a shop in Ostia, but he says, no, I want to work for you guys. So he prays for this safe return or whatever. I guess I don't really get why they couldn't allow Merlinus here. It doesn't super matter because you're just gonna end up dropping like shit when you get the legendary weapons. I ended up dropping a couple of the legendary weapons because I'm dumb, but it ended up not mattering. You get some legendary weapons here, or not legendary weapons, but like S rank weapons. They're just really powerful, and they're strong enough to fight the final boss in case you don't have good lords or whatever. There are 12 party members allowed in this final chapter. However, 5 of them are forced, which means you're only allowed to bring 7 party members of your choosing to this final chapter. The ones that I've chose were Sarah, Lucius, Hawken, Hawkeye, Harkin, Pent, Oswin, and I don't remember the last one. Oh, Florina, of course. How could I forget Florina? She's my goat. She was extremely strong. She did so much damage against so many other guys. And then, of course, the 5 forced party members are the 3 lords, Hector, Elowood, Lyn, and then also Nils and Athos. Those 5 are all forced. I guess if Nils is dead, then you might be allowed to bring an 8th party member, but then you might run into that glitch that I was talking about, so I'm not sure if that's entirely advisable. Right before you actually confront Nurgle, he says something about having opened the gate, and I don't get what he means by this because he clearly hasn't opened the gate, otherwise there would be dragons attacking us, and that doesn't happen until later, spoilers. So I don't really get what he meant by this. But whatever, I guess it doesn't fucking matter. Nurgle literally just says shit sometimes, and it's so funny. There's like a bunch of conversations that go on here with Nurgle at the end, and none of them really landed for me. None of them feel like it's like there's like some platitudes about friendship that don't really land because it doesn't feel like lessons that the characters have had to learn at all, like at any point up to this point, and I don't get it. This it doesn't feel this shit just doesn't thematically resonate with me at all. And it feels like it's really supposed to, and I just don't feel anything when I read these conversations between the protagonist and the final villain. And I think that that's like a mark of how unsuccessful this story was in a lot of ways. That like the actual, like, I think Nurgle is an interesting villain. I think he has a very compelling backstory. I think his motivations are very interesting. But I think at the end of the day, the basically non-existent chemistry or dynamics between the main villain and the protagonists of the game is just so damning. I just don't feel anything about their interactions with each other. I just don't. So I feel like narratively this just doesn't land for me at all. This game does do a thing that I really like, where almost every single Fire Emblem game does this. I don't remember if they literally all do or just like most of them. I don't remember which ones do, which ones don't. But this one definitely does. When you deploy your 7 guys, the 7 guys that you're able to choose, they all have a little quote right at the end as the map starts, which I think is very nice. Most of them are pretty boring. Like Lucius is like, "Oh, Saint Elamine guide us in this battle" or whatever, some shit like that. It's all basically that stuff. So narratively, I don't feel like this is a very successful endgame. However, mechanically, I actually quite like it. I think this is one of the better endgames in the series, actually, because I think this essentially the way it plays out is that in order to access Nurgle, you have to kill every boss in various rooms that are scattered around. It's actually very similar to FE5 endgame, except actually, it's kind of basically identical to that, huh? The only difference really is that you don't have to have characters like stand inside the rooms that the bosses come from. The bosses themselves just need to be gone. The doors also open automatically, so you don't need to worry about not having enough keys or ways to get inside of rooms. The doors will open automatically. You can open them yourself early if you have an unlock staff or a door key, which is why I mentioned that the unlock staff might be kind of useful. Oh, I did forget to mention that in Value of Life, if you warp somebody into the room with Kishuna at the end, before the like without unlocking the door naturally, then a bunch of berserkers will spawn and attack you because the game knows that you cheated, which is really funny. But yes, but you can skip around and do some of the bosses out of the intended order, I guess you could say. And some of these bosses are extremely strong. The standouts for sure are Uhai, which is like insanely cracked for no reason. He has cap speed as a nomad trooper, which has one of the highest speed caps. So he's gonna double like everybody on your team. Not to mention most of these guys have really powerful weapons, S rank or A rank weapons for the most part. Some of them will drop their weapons, like Uhai drops his S rank bow, which is pretty cool. I don't have any S rank bow users, so I couldn't use it on anybody. But it's the thought that counts, I guess. Lloyd and Linus are also in this chapter. I guess I should explain what's actually going on here. So they are morphs made by Nurgle in the images of people whose quintessence he has harvested, essentially. So there's Uhai, Lloyd, Linus. Not in this order, but there's Uhai, Lloyd, Linus, Darren, Brendan Reed, Ursula, and then for some reason Kenneth and Jeremy are both there. I don't get that one. In fact, it's really funny because regardless of which Pale Flower of Darkness you did, both bosses are here. So the first time I played this game, I distinctly remember thinking, who the fuck is Kenneth and why is he a final boss in this chapter? But he is yeah, both bosses of both versions of Pale Flower of Darkness appear in this chapter. Most of them are pretty easy, which brings me to one of the highlights of this chapter is that we get to use Athos, and Athos is extremely good. He's very strong. He has very high stats. He has S rank in all three types of magic and staves. And you just slap a Luna tone on him because he can use Luna, because he can use dark magic, and he just kicks ass. Luna does damage equal to the user's magic stat, essentially, because it itself has a might of 0. However, it negates enemy resistance. So it is always going to do damage equal to the user's magic stat, which is phenomenal if you are Athos and your magic stat is 30. You are doing a flat 30 damage to every enemy, and it is pretty accurate. You can, I think, double with it. Athos isn't like super fast. He's not doubling very consistently, but it is possible. So, there's that. Athos just kind of cleans house here. He beats the shit out of most of these morphs. It has a high crit rate also, so he can just crit some of these guys. And the few that he can't take out with like him using Luna and then Nils dancing for him and him using Luna again, there are a couple instances where that's not necessarily going to work, like against Nurgle or against Lloyd and Linus, because you can't take out both of them with Athos unless you like double crit, I guess. But the point is that it definitely helps a lot. It softens them up. And Athos is just an extremely valuable asset to your team in this chapter. It's extremely good. I believe he does cause a game over if he dies. In fact, I think I learned that firsthand. No, I didn't. And he didn't die. I think it was Ellawood that I left in range of somebody by accident, and he got his ass beat because he's terrible. But yes, Nurgle himself is the final boss. Once you clear out everybody else, the final room opens up. There's some guys you have to worry about. There's like a bolting sage, and there's a druid with berserk or something like that. So you have to be a little bit careful as you approach. But Nurgle himself is pretty tough. He's very bulky and does a ton of damage. But Athos, combined with some brave weapons, or the S rank weapons if you decided to hang on to them for characters that are able to use them. I didn't actually have anybody that could use the Regal Blade, so I dropped the Regal Blade. I didn't have anybody that could use Basilicos, so I dropped Basilicos. I think the only one that I could have used is, I think a few of my guys had S-rank lances, so I could have used Rex Asta, or Rex Hasta. But I accidentally dropped that one, or like just wasn't. Wasn't an accident, but I wasn't thinking, and I just decided to like it wouldn't end up mattering. It did end up mattering a little bit, but we'll get into why in a minute. Okay, but yes, Nurgle so like I said, between Athos and a couple of other guys, taking out Nurgle isn't too much of a challenge. He has quite a few death quotes, or battle quotes, I guess, with various members of your army. Lynn, Ellawood, and Hector, and Athos obviously he has with all of those guys. I think that's probably it. There might be a couple more, but I think Renault has a unique one because Renault has some history with Nurgle, which we'll get into in his supports. But I think that is a possibility as well. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, now let's talk about Nurgle's death quote, which is hysterical. So, Nurgle has a specific death quote. He has I think a few different ones that you can get, but his most well-known one you get by completing. I think you need to complete all of the Kashuna chapters. You need to make sure that you do all of the chapters involving Kashuna, and you need to, which doesn't make any sense because Kashuna is not, especially for like Genesis and Value of Life, Kashuna doesn't have anything to do with Nurgle's backstory. for 19XX, I sort of get it because you learn Nurgle's backstory in that chapter, and that one's tied to Kashuna. But you need to make sure that you visit every chapter with Kashuna in it, and that you kill Kashuna in Value of Life. I think those are the only requirements. And what you get is an extremely underwhelming death quote, where what he says, "Oh, why did I want power?" And then in the Japanese script, apparently what he says is, so his wife's name, his dragon wife, her name was Einir, Aenir, I think. And quintessence, what they have called quintessence in this is called Eiger or Eiger. I don't know how you would say it in Japanese. But that is Aegir. That is how it is romanized. And allegedly, what happened is that in the Japanese script, it is only the shared sounds between the two words, between Einir and Aegir, that are shown in this death quote. However, in English, that doesn't work. So what they did was the writers decided that he was trying to say quintessence instead of his fucking wife's name. And so they just mistranslated the death quote. The death quote that you have to work so hard to obtain. You have to go out of your way to get every single like optional bullshit chapter, and you don't even get the reward that it's supposed to give you, which already would have been underwhelming. It's the perfect encapsulation for this game being such a fucking clusterfuck. It sucks. I don't like it. We're not quite out of the woods yet, though, because after you kill Nurgle, he decides that he's going to use his final breath to open the Dragon's Gate, finally actually open the Dragon's Gate, even though he said he had already. Don't worry about it. Which means that we're going to have to fight dragons. At first, it actually seems like we're going to have to fight 3 of them because, it cuts to, you were able to go back into wherever his little private sanctum is where he has the Dragon's Gate all set up. And he opens the gate and 3 dragons come through. And all 3 dragons are ganging up on, I believe it's Athos. Yeah, so 2 of the dragons attack Athos with fire breath. He's trying his best to hold them off. It's not going super well. But just when all hope seems lost, who should show up but Bramimond, who says that he needed some time to get some preparations done, but now everybody can focus their energy like Goku charging the goddamn Spirit Bomb, and he uses that power to bring Ninian back to life. Which... okay, so... I don't hate this that much. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's dumb. I think the fact that Ninian's death ended up not really mattering that much in the grand scheme of things is kind of bullshit. Especially in a series like Fire Emblem, where death is usually so significant and so meaningful, both in gameplay and in story, right? It's not like this sort of thing never happens. I mean, you can even go back to the first game we played for this series, for this podcast in FE4, and there's a lot of times where death, feels a little bit less meaningful. Excuse me, less meaningful than maybe it should. With stuff like Sigurd and Deirdre's ghosts coming back to talk to Seliph, and a lot of the characters who you think might die in the Battle of Valhalla are actually still fine. And all that stuff. So it's not like this is a complaint unique to this game, but it feels very centralized and very, I guess just very cheap, I mean, I don't think I need to explain in too much detail the reasons why bringing a character whose death was like a big emotional climax, why bringing that character back to life is would be considered maybe a little bit of cheap writing. But I'm not a big fan of it. I like Ninian. I'm glad that she survived. I wish that they hadn't bothered to kill her off in the first place if they were just going to do this. Like it feels like they wanted the emotional gut punch of her dying without actually wanting to, sit with the ramifications of that in the long term. They get to have their cake and eat it too, which is kind of the best way I can think of to describe it. I'm not a fan. But he brings Ninian back to life, and Ninian is just like so much more powerful than all the other dragons, I guess, and is able to kill two of them essentially. There is still one left, and after she kills the other two, Ninian can't sustain her power anymore. She falls unconscious, or needs to just like stop attacking, whatever it is. I don't remember exactly what happens. But she makes your fight significantly easier now that there's only one dragon to deal with. And the rest of the map, the part 2 of this end game, is fighting this dragon. It is just one really powerful enemy. There are actually a couple of enemies on this map. Mostly, I don't think mostly, actually. I think it's entirely guys who stand in like the far corners of the map that have status staves and like some long range tomes that have really, really long reaches. So they can like try to fuck with you a little bit if this takes more than one turn. And it can take more than one turn. It's not actually too unreasonable for this to be like, this is a pretty tough final boss. He has, I believe, 120 HP exactly, which does mean that if you are willing to rig a Luna crit with Athos after using Phila's Might on him, then he will kill in one attack. Or even if you just kill with if you just like all you need is a regular hit with Athos, and like without using Phila's Might, you can do it in one hit and one crit if you dance for him with Nils, or whatever. And then there also Ellawood and Hector and Lynn have their legendary weapons, which do additional damage to the dragon. So if any of them are like competently leveled, they can fight him. And then in an absolute worst case scenario, S rank weapons do like a little bit of damage to the dragon as well. But you know, you might not have access to all those things. All of my lords were pretty bad, so I wasn't able to like actually use my lords to damage the dragon at all. Instead, what I had to do was I just needed to, I think I needed to do this over 2 turns, maybe even 3. I don't remember exactly why, but I basically just needed to keep attacking with Athos. I think I used Phila's Might and attacked 3 times with Athos because he was the only one that could actually like do damage to the dragon. I could have done damage with Florina, but like I said earlier, I accidentally got rid of my Rex Hosta, so she wasn't really able to do any damage to him. It was a little bit of a scuffed dragon fight, I will admit, but it didn't end up mattering. The guys on the far ends are not very threatening, as long as you get somewhat lucky or are somewhat prepared with healing or a restore staff, you should be fine. The dragon does a flat, I believe, 37 damage, and will never double. It always does exactly that amount of damage. So actually, no, it's not true. He can double, but only like he's not like super fast. So only like your really slow units are going to get doubled by this guy. Like Hector, for example. My Hector was extremely slow, even though he was like pretty decent level. I think I just got like really bad speed level ups on him. So he ended up not being useful at all, unfortunately. But I managed. The dragon's AI is not like fantastic about deciding who to attack. So it's fine. It's not really a big concern. I definitely don't like this final boss as much as I would have if Nurgle was the actual final boss. I don't think that it's very interesting to just have Athos attack this guy 4 times or 3 times depending on what combination of things you do. It's just it is kind of lame. I'm just gonna come out and say it. Thankfully I didn't have to find out the hard way. I'm pretty sure that if you die here, you have to redo the whole Nurgle section of the map as well, which is unfortunate. And I would not wish that on my worst enemy because I do like that section of endgame, but just having to do all of it over again, just to have another chance at fighting this dragon would be asinine. I'm very glad I did not have to do that. Once you defeat the dragon, the game's over. We do some ending cutscenes. Quite a few things happen. There's a lot of pretty significant wrap up here. The first thing that happens is Athos basically succumbs to his injuries. He uses up all his energy. He's injured from fighting the dragons and presumably from fighting Nurgle. So the last of his remaining, I guess, life force leaves him and he dies. right before he dies, he does the really dumb thing that I don't like. So this game is very self-aware of the fact that it is a prequel to FE6 in ways that I don't find particularly interesting or endearing. And this is probably the icing on the cake of that idea, because right before Athos dies, he makes sure that he has he's able to do a prophecy somehow, even though I don't think he's ever been said to be able to see into the future at all. I'm not sure. But he's like, oh, there will be a great calamity, but Lycia will bring hope once again. I don't think that was necessary. I really don't think that adds anything to the experience. I think if anything, it kind of cheapens this ending, because for one of the major characters to spend his final moments and the final moments of this story focusing on another story, I think is really lame. I don't think that he went out very well at all. I also think that this whole sequence with the dragons narratively is pretty scuffed, because between Ninian coming back to life and her conveniently being strong enough to take out two of them but not quite the last one, it's just not fun. What I would have liked more, actually, well, hold on, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So after Athos dies, Eliwood and so Ninian and Nils decide that they're going to head back across the Dragon's Gate back to their home where they came from. And Ninian, if she has an A support with Eliwood, they have a conversation where essentially Ninian's like, oh, Eliwood, I need to go, I need to leave, I need to go back home. But Nils can tell that she really does want to stay with Eliwood, so he convinces her to stay behind. He adds a little bit of extra lore, a little bit of extra context to this, saying, Ninian, the air in this world, it's not the same as it was when we were here last. And if we stay here for an extended period of time, we're not going to survive. We can't sustain ourselves here. Our strength is not going to return. But in spite of that, I can tell that you still want to stay here. So I think you should, and I'm going to go back behind. I'm going to go back to where we came from. And it's a little bit of a nice moment. I think I could take it or leave it. I like Ninian and Eliwood's relationship, but I'm not a huge fan of this goodbye between her and Nils. I think that could have been handled a lot better. But I'll live. It's not a huge deal. If Eliwood and Ninian do not have their A support, then Ninian goes back to the other side of the Dragon's Gate with Nils. I'm not a huge fan of this sort of contrivance that Ninian can't stay alive in this world for very long. I kind of get why they did it. I think I mentioned this in the support episode with Lack, but I kind of get why they did it, because they wanted to give a narrative explanation for why Ninian isn't around in FE6, despite being, dragons living for a really long time and being, very long-lived creatures. They might want that explanation for why she's not around in FE6. Whereas with the human moms, Lynn and the potential human marriage partners for Eliwood, being Lynn and Fiora, you can just say that they died of illness or old age or whatever, and it just kind of, it works a lot better. But they definitely, I don't think, needed to shove that in there. I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense. So then everybody leaves, and as things are sort of wrapping up, the lord of your choice will have a conversation with and a CG with the character of whoever they ended up paired up with. So if it's Hector, he can end up paired with Lynn, Fiora, or Farina, and he has a different CG for both of those. Whereas Eliwood can end up with Lynn, Fiora, or Ninian, as I said. And he has a CG for all of those. I'm actually a really big fan of the CG for Ninian, because it's a callback where he's like princess carrying her, similarly to how he did when he saved her in Chapter 7 of Lin mode. there was a CG for that too, and he's carrying her in a similar way to he did back then. I think that's just like a really nice touch. This game has some good details sometimes. They definitely care about the writing and the story in this game for the most part. I'm pretty down on it, but I do think there's a lot of really nice moments like that. That I think just kind of bring the experience together in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. I'm a big fan of that. And then we have a sort of time skip to a year later, where there is an extended scene if you have tactician data, if you decided to play the game with a tactician. Because remember, if you started directly from Eliwood or Hector mode, you could choose not to do any sort of tactician. So there would be no conversations directed at Mark. No, Mark would not be involved in any way. But if you do have a tactician, there's an extended cut here where Mark talks with Eliwood or Hector, depending on the mode you played, and then their partner comes in. I gotta read the Eliwood mode version real quick here. Give me a second. Okay, yeah. So I'm not a huge fan of the version of this for Eliwood mode. So he talks to Mark. He's like, "Hey, Mark, how's it going?" And then his choice of partner comes in. Lynn or whoever it is. And they talk. They he's like, "Hi, Mark, how you doing?" And they ask you basically point blank, like, "Hey, Mark, will you name our firstborn child?" Which feels a little bit weird to me. I think this is like, overall, I think FE7 avoids the pitfall that the other avatars in this series have. Where they'll like be too much of a focus, or the game and the writing will pander to them and make them feel like really special and awesome. This is really the only time where I feel like FE7 does that with Mark. Because frankly, Mark being the one to name Roy is like fucking ridiculous, right? It's so stupid. It feels like it takes so much agency away from Eliwood. Is like, what if this protagonist from the last game that I really liked, what if you named that guy? It's silly. It's so silly that it kind of wraps back around to me liking it almost, but not quite. I think it's quite stupid, actually. Now, the equivalent scene in Hector is a lot better, because first of all, they do not ask you to name their child. Instead, they just ask you to be the godfather or the godmother, which I think fits better. Obviously you are pretty close with, I think especially Lynn. I feel like you and Lynn have a, like, I don't know, I always felt like Lynn and Mark had like this really deep friendship connection that I never really felt the same way with Eliwood or Hector. But so I definitely feel more on board if like Lynn is the mom here, but especially but also with Hector, even if Lynn isn't involved, I think Hector is close enough with Mark for this to be like reasonably justifiable. And then they have a bit here that does reference FE6 that I actually really like, because it's quite funny. Basically, the reason that they don't want you to name their kid, besides that being really weird and dumb, is that they've already decided on a name. They've decided that they're going to name their child Uther, after Hector's brother. And then Mark says, well, he doesn't say anything, but Hector kind of Dora the Explorer's, what your response is. He says that there's no way it could be a girl. Like, Mark asks, what if it's a girl? What are you going to name her if it's a girl? And he says, well, it's my son, or it's my kid, so it's going to be a boy, obviously. Which I just think is really funny. That's a fun little nod. That feels much more in place. And then the mom kind of like pulls you aside and says, let's talk about what we should name him or name her if it's a girl. I don't know if the implication there is supposed to be that Mark helps pick the name for Lilina also, but if it is, then that's also dumb. But I think it's more just like the mom is like has ideas for what to name the daughter, and they want to talk about it with Mark. So then we skip forward even further in time, and Hector and Eliwood meet up. This time they're adults. Both of them are the lords of their respective nations at this point, of their respective territories. Roy and Lilina are born. They seem to be probably about like 4 or 5, which I'm not sure how well that works like timeline wise, but it doesn't really matter. I think it makes sense if it's about like 10 years after the events of the main events of FE7. I think it mostly makes sense. And Roy and Lilina meet. It kind of like talks a little bit about, this shows them meeting for the first time, I think. And it's nice to see how they like met and why they, where they began to where they began to form such a deep connection that they have with each other in FE6. And then Eliwood and Hector start talking about some of the goings on in the world, including a situation in Bern where supposedly Zephiel had died, but then it turns out that it was Desmond who died, and they're a little bit confused as to what's going on, but they feel like something is amiss, and they do reflect back and think about what Athos said to them right before he died about how Bern would cause a great calamity and that Lycia would bring hope again. And they just kind of muse about it for a little bit. Not huge on this scene, but I don't think it's outright bad either. It's like whatever. I could take it or leave it, really. And then finally, the last note that this game ends on is a scene of an adult Zephiel. Presumably this is another time skip. Like it's kind of implied that this is happening concurrently, but I'm pretty sure from what I remember of FE6 that that this can't be happening when Roy is this young, because I don't think that Zephiel has been, his plans have been in motion for quite so long. But Zephiel is just chilling at his throne when Jan shows up and says who are you to bother and awaken dragons, and Zephiel asks like who wants to know, basically, and Jan says, well, I'm a dragon, and Zephiel has this like has like a evil face CG that I think is pretty cool. It's a fun note to end the game on. You see, like, I go back and forth on this because some of the callbacks to FE6 are cool. I like the idea of the game ending on like this really weird, like, ooh, what's gonna happen next? Well, I guess we know what's gonna happen next because FE6 is already out. But if you're playing FE7 first, like teasing at like, oh, play this game to find out what, like, where this story continues. The atmosphere is kind of like genuinely unnerving at the end there, which it should be, because I think that, sort of FE7 is a little bit of it's kind of just like a precursor to the real main event of FE6, dealing with dragons, fully instead of just sort of the teaser that we got in FE7. But then sometimes it's them asking Eliwood asking Mark to name his child. So I'm not a huge fan of some of those elements, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a very hit or miss, but overall a relatively strong ending. It's a roller coaster, right? Because some of the stuff is so bad. I don't like Ninian coming back to life. I don't think the way Athos' death is handled is particularly strong. I don't like some of the stuff with the ending with Mark. But on the other hand, I like the way that Nurgle's story comes to an end for the most part. I like the teaser with Zephiel at the end. I like, I enjoy like Ninian and Eliwood's relationship overall, and the end of that, where that ends up by the end of the game. So I hesitate to call it a strong ending because I don't really know that I feel that way, but I think there are some elements here that I'm happy with, and that I don't hate it. Basically, I think overall, for a game that I have very mixed feelings about, I guess it's very fitting and appropriate that I should have very mixed feelings about the ending of the game as well. So take that as you will. I think it's fine. Kind of like the whole rest of this game, but I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself, because I want to save all that for when we do the wrap-up episode, or when I do the wrap-up episode. I'm going to be riding solo for that one for the first time since Genealogy, because I had Spike for the Thracia wrap-up episode. I had Soup for the FE6 wrap-up episode, but I'm going to be riding solo for this one. There are, okay, so roadmap for the end here. There are 2 more SSS episodes coming. There's one focusing on Renault and a few others that's going to come out after this episode. There's one that's going to focus on the Lords that I was hoping to have Lack on board with me for, but that ended up not working out, so I'm going to be alone for that one as well. And then somewhere in there, but probably between those 2 SSS episodes, we're going to get the wrap-up episode of this game. Now, I'm a little all over the place for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to apologize because it is now I'm recording this on January 27th. And I believe I was listening back to the beginning of this episode. I believe I began recording this episode on like fucking December 23rd or something like that. It was 21st, maybe, something like that. So this one has been in the works for over a month now. And there have been a couple reasons for that. First of all, obviously the holiday season was just busy. I was with my family for multiple days. And in general just had a lot going on. But then the biggest reason that I haven't been focusing on this too much is that I got like sick, like pretty significantly sick for almost 2 full weeks, basically. And I just could not catch a break. I'm still like on and off feeling sick, like still a month later. I haven't actually I don't think I've worked a full week since the New Year's, because there's usually like 1 or 2 days where I'm not feeling well enough to go in. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just like, it's a lot of stuff's going around recently. It might still be the residuals I don't know if it was the flu. It kind of felt like it might be the flu. But I had like a pretty strong cold that knocked me out for like 3 days. So I think I'm still feeling some of the residuals of that. But yeah, so I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm hoping to get this out within the next day or two, which shouldn't be an issue. I might be able to get it out today, actually, because I just need to edit this last section, because I recorded most of the episode back in December, so that shouldn't be a problem at all. And then I'm not comfortable giving a timeline on most of the rest of it. I have one of the SSS episodes recorded, so that should be uploaded soon. But then I still need to record the wrap up, and I need to record the SSS episode for the Lord still. So any time period on that can be a little bit wonky. I do just want to add, I'm not sure. I don't think I actually said anything about the question of the episode at the beginning of this episode, because I didn't get any responses to that on Twitter. So for a while, I didn't think that I had any. But then I checked, and one person did respond to me via email, which, as a reminder, is turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. If you recall, the question for last episode was, what is your favorite or least favorite Gaiden chapter in FE7? And the response that I got reads, "Hey Melee, best FE7 Gaiden chapter is 16X, Port of Badon, without a doubt. I love how natural and clearly defined the 2 strategic options you have, either go the long way around or take the pirates head on in a choke point fight. It's the same dynamic that's in FE6 Chapter 5, but both options are more fun to play here because the map design is so much tighter. Plus, it's got Fargus and Kanas, who are both favorites. Worst Gaiden is 25X Night of Farewells, for all the reasons you talked about. The water bridges are super tedious, and it's just not very much fun to play. You'd think the game's water map would be Dart's chance to shine, but his water walking ability doesn't feel as impactful here as it should." And then as a side note, normally I don't include stuff like this, but at the end they do say, "Thanks for making this podcast. There's not enough FE fan content focused on the high-level gameplay and game design, and your insights are interesting." Apparently their Twitter tag before they deleted their Twitter, which I'll get to in a second, was at Crush the Flowers. So thank you, at Crush the Flowers. Before I deleted my Twitter, thank you for providing a non-Twitter option. Fuck that Elon guy. So the reason that I wanted to mention this is actually seeing this email. So Crush the Flowers, I don't know how you want to be referred to as. They signed their email Drano. So I guess Drano. I appreciate you writing in. And you have convinced me to essentially make a blue sky. I haven't at the time that I'm recording this. I probably won't have fully done it by the time this episode goes up. But within the next few days, I'm planning on making a blue sky, probably with the same handle. So I'll have that. I'll once that's up, I'll mention it in the next episode. I'll probably mention it on Twitter for anybody who follows me on Twitter. Because honestly, I don't have a very big audience anyway. I don't know how many people are still who would care enough to follow me from Twitter to Blue Sky. So I kind of just stayed on Twitter. But Twitter sucks, especially right now. I mean, Drano summed it up perfectly. Fuck Elon Musk. And I certainly, if even one single person indicated to me that they didn't want to like stay on Twitter, then I was planning to just switch to Blue Sky. So yeah, I will have that Blue Sky handle set up and talk about it in the next episode. And in the meantime, you can still respond to any questions at I'm Emile Kirby turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com, or if you're still on Twitter, you can respond at I'm Emile Kirby on Twitter. My personal thoughts on this question are very similar. I definitely agree that the best guide and chapter is the Port of Badon. I think it's just like fun. You know, it's you have a few different options there. You can split up your army. I like the choke point design of the map. Urban maps in like towns and cities tend to be some of my favorite Fire Emblem maps. So it's a pretty fun experience overall. I'm a huge fan. I don't honestly know which is my least favorite. A Night of Farewells is down there for sure. I'm not a huge fan of it. But there's others that I also really don't like. I don't like 19X, mostly because the 19X is like fine, but if you're factoring in having to kill Kushina, then I think it's kind of a fucking nightmare. I hate it. But that's not necessarily fair because you don't have to kill Kushina for that map, or Kushina. No. Fuck. I always mix this up because one of them is Naruto's mom, and then I think it's Kushina is Naruto's mom. Yes, okay. So Kishuna is the Fire Emblem 7 boss. You do not have to kill Kishuna for to beat that chapter, so I don't know if it's necessarily fair. I guess you could equally hold that against 19XX, but I don't think 19XX is that bad. I think the actual gameplay of 19XX is like fine. Even though I don't like Fog of War, it's not great, but I don't hate it. So there's like a lot of very mediocre maps. I don't think there are any in this game that I hate as much as some of the ones in FE5 and FE6, for what that's worth. But I do like the Port of Badon quite a bit. For next episode, for the wrap-up episode, I want to know the same thing as always. Who is your favorite character in Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade? You guys already know my answer to this question. I mentioned it in many main episodes. I mentioned it in at least one or two SSS episodes. So you guys already know what my answer is going to be. But please leave your answers at I'm Emile Kirby on Twitter.com or email turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to hold off until I post about my Blue Sky, you can do that as well. So I'll probably, if I do have it ready to go by the time I upload this episode, I will probably include it in the episode description. So keep your eye open for that. Okay, let me see here. There's a lot it's been like 2 months since the last time I uploaded, so there's been a lot going on. I've been playing a lot of games. I've been watching a lot of shit. I actually might want to save some of that for next time, though, for a couple reasons. First of all, I'm pretty tired. I'm recording this. You might be able to tell. I feel like my commentary has been a little bit scatterbrained. Part of that is because I'm pretty tired. That's another thing. I've been quite tired recently. But I really wanted to get this done. I wanted to just get it out. So I'm pushing myself to get through it. So I'll probably save any discussion of news and any discussion of my own personal goings on for next time, because another reason is because there's a lot of it and I want to like keep track of it, make sure that I'm like covering it all, because I definitely want to. I want to. There's so much cool shit that I've been doing lately, so many good games that I've been playing, so many good shows that I've been watching, that I really want to discuss as much of it as I can in depth. There is one other reason that I want to save that for next time, though, and that is because I have something that I feel pretty strongly about that I want to talk about. Now, it's about politics, so if you don't want to hear me talk about that, then you can leave. That's fine. I totally respect that. If you don't want to hear people talk about politics, I get it. That's no worries at all. Take care. See you next time. But I don't have a lot of people to listen to this podcast. That's fine. I don't care. I'm not doing this to get like a lot of fame or notoriety. It's just like a fun passion project that I have a lot of fun working on, and that's fine. But there are enough people who consistently listen, who consistently engage with the show, that I feel at least a little bit obligated to discuss this. So between the last episode going out and now, I live in the United States of America. and based on my analytics, a lot of my listeners live in the United States of America. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And if you know anything about the state of affairs in America right now politically, you probably have an idea of where I'm going with this. So I have discussed briefly some of my political views on the show before. I mentioned that I'm very pro LGBTQ. I'm a pretty left leaning person. All that stuff. And I don't really talk about politics mostly just because it's not relevant. I'm not one of those people that thinks that you shouldn't talk about politics or that you should keep gaming and politics separate, because I feel very strongly that politics can and do inform both how games are made and how games are experienced. I don't think there is such a thing as truly apolitical art. I am one of those. If you disagree, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, but I am one of those. So, if I ever do bring up politics in relation to Fire Emblem, just be prepared for that. You saw this coming. You had an opportunity to jump ship when you had the chance. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I know that this has been a very scary week for a lot of people. And I am not one of the people who is most directly affected by what's going on right now, but I have a lot of friends who are, and some family members, not many, but some family members and a lot of friends and people that I care deeply about who are being negatively impacted right now by things that are being enacted politically over the past week or so. And I feel like, for whatever it is worth, which might not be much, but for whatever it's worth, I wanted to do my part to show support for the people who are suffering the hardest right now. Melee's Turnwheel will always be a safe place for people of color, people of LGBTQ, in that community. You are welcome here. You are loved, you are respected, you are appreciated, and if you are someone who is bigoted against those groups, or who is happy about the state of affairs right now, I am not going to tell you that you are not welcome, because I think that I encourage you to keep an open mind, to engage with people who disagree with you politically. But at the end of the day, I do think that this is not. On a personal level, I just don't like you, and I'm sorry. Like I'm not gonna apologize for feeling that way, because the people who are persecuted right now are being persecuted as a direct result of the actions of a lot of people, many people who self-identify as gamers, and who are active on places like Reddit and Discord and Twitter, especially Twitter, where a lot of the traction for this podcast comes from. So you are still welcome. Please continue to listen to the show if you would like to. But just know that whatever community exists around my content, not much right now, but especially in the future as things change, maybe there will be. Maybe I'll have a Discord server at some point. Maybe I'll have probably never a Patreon, because I'm never going to be able to do this consistently enough to justify a Patreon. But whatever it may be, I need people to understand where I stand on things, because even just one person feels a little bit better because I said something, then it was worth it. And maybe no one will, and that's totally okay. But I want to at least get it out there so I don't feel like I could have done something but didn't, Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox, not because I don't think it's important, but because at the end of the day, it's just words. I'm not, there's only so much I can do to actually help the people who most need help right now. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm changing any lives by saying to my audience of like 30 people that you're loved and appreciated, but you are, and I just wanted to make sure that was known. Okay, so with that out of the way, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.